the 74th character has joined Tacticus, as Azkor, the Eightfold, comes in as the third World Eater. Today we'll look at whether they should be joining your team or just left to rot in the sarcophagus for all time. Hot on the heels of Macer, we're joined by the third World Eater Azkor, the Eightfold, who is an exalted 8-bound character in 40k. They're joining us this month through the For the Blood God character release event. Each 8-bound is possessed by an octet of cornate demons, achieving a form of apotheosis. As their mortal soul conquers the demons that share its body, exalted 8-bound exhibit a purer and more focused rage, one that is directed entirely at their foes. And this is definitely a very flavoursome character and someone I am interested in working with, so let's have a look at why that is. As always in this series, we're going to take a look at 3 different things: how long it roughly takes to level him up to Diamond 3 when compared to other characters, his traits and general usefulness, how good he is in legendary events, and I won't be looking too much into his usefulness in guild raids or tournaments, as I leave that to our other wonderful content creators. So let's dive right in. In order to get Azkor, the new character release event for the Blood God will be starting on the 26th of May, and this is very much the same as the last character events where we unlocked Macer and Rask. You can see the missions on screen now, and there's no change to them from the Macer event, except of course with the last 2 where you can use Azkor instead of Macer. If you need help with these missions and getting the best possible start, then definitely check out my beginner's guide to character events, which is linked in the description below. This will guarantee that you get to open him. Basically, if you play through the tournament arena and spend 110 blackstone per day, we'll definitely be picking up Azkor at Epic 1 level, without the need to purchase any additional packs. So it should be well within your reach as an engaged player at Tacticus. And in the meantime, if you want to earn some free blackstone to help you on your way, you can use my Referral Code in-game today to get 100 free blackstone. Just note you can only use one Referral Code, so make sure you make the most of it. And now let's move to looking at roughly how long it takes him to level from Stone 1 to Diamond 3. The reason I say roughly is because my sheets don't take into account all the extra ways you can get free energy, like in the tournament arena, nor getting items gifted from your guildmates or from the daily shop. It also doesn't take into account any hard to get items that haven't been added in lots of places yet, but even with all that in mind, it's always interesting to see how they compare to the other characters. And for Azkor, he's very similar to Rask and Macer, but takes just a tiny bit longer to level than both of them. We can see him down in 64th position and takes 36 days to go from Stone 1 to Diamond 3. This of course follows all the recent releases that are pretty similar in terms of leveling. With a graph, we can see him over there on the right hand side, but in truth he's pretty damn close to those all around him with very little differences. It takes him 3 days to go from Stone 1 to Bronze 1, another 2 days to go from Bronze 1 to Silver 1, 5 days to Gold 1, 13 days to Diamond 1, and then another 13 days to Diamond 3. So it's definitely worth considering him from this regard, but let's see if he has anything worthwhile in his kit. Let's take a look at his traits. He definitely has a lot of them, which is why he's very interesting for me. He's a Chaos character, and he has an Eviscerate 2 melee attack. This is a new kind of damage introduced this patch that has a 50% piercing ratio. He has no ranged attack. As a World Eater, he has the Blessings of Khorne trait. He's a demon, or, well, 8 of them in one body. He's resilient, he is terrifying, and he is unstoppable. And that's a lot of traits. If we move on to his skills, his passive is Beacon of Rage, and this is an interesting skill because it not only buffs Azkor, but also gives 50% of the extra damage to other Chaos characters. It's quite a buff as well, as the longer the battle goes on, then for every hit he takes up to 8, he can add up to 300 damage per hit. So with that in mind, I've classified it as a buffing skill, even though it adds damage to himself as well. Should it be prioritized as a skill over others? I think for Chaos teams, yes. It's definitely one that I'll be leveling to see how much of a difference it makes. His active is Overwhelming Wrath, and this falls into the damage category of skills, even though there's a bit of defensive help there, as he taunts and takes up to 64% less damage from ranged attacks. As it's a skill that only lasts for 1 turn, I don't find it particularly useful in defense, and so it's more for the damage for me. Should this be prioritized as a skill over others? I would say no, unless you're really leveling him. There are just better early skills to have than this one. It doesn't mean it's a bad skill, it just means that I would focus on it later. And so with all this in mind together, why do I like him? Well, for me, he's a really nice balance of attack, buffing, and defense, and in the modes that I prioritize, which is Arena, Guild Wars, and Legendary events, I think he works really well in those. The Terrifying skill means he takes 30% less damage from melee attacks, and that's going to be pretty useful as a defensive trait. I think that's a really undervalued defensive trait right now, and so I really want to try him out next to Tyrant Guard, who's going to be reducing his overall damage by quite a lot as well. I think it'll make quite a difference, but let's see. And so who does he work really well with? For me, I've been really impressed with the World Eaters so far, especially Rask and now Azkor. I really do want to put together a team that excels with their skill sets. For that, I wonder about a mixed team of Thousand Suns and World Eaters mixing in Toth and Thaumaturgus into the current bunch. This would be a crazy amount of shielding, damages and healing, and I think that would be a super amount of fun. And just watch this hit here from Azkor as he uses his active. This takes out Calgar and Bellator. Crazy damages, but it's really tough to ignore the healing for Rotbone in a Chaos team. With that in mind, I would probably keep Rotbone in the middle of a crazy resilient team that would be fronted by Azkor, with Maladus and Macer on either side. Rotbone would be behind them to keep them alive or revive them if they do finally fall, and then finally Typhus or Abaddon in the back for a little bit of range damage. And so I know that people are still fascinated with guild raids as their main mode, and with that in mind, they're quite stuck in leveling other characters, but I do think there's a really serious team here coming together with the World Eaters, and I'm very much looking forward to adding them to my Guild Wars and Legendary Events teams. Speaking of legendary events, just before we deep dive into Azkor's legendary event usefulness, I wanted to note a small change that's happened with another character. Tank Smasher had a recent rework, and as part of this has had his physical damage removed from him. This has been replaced by direct and eviscerate damage, and although they're not in any legendary battles currently, physical was. And so just note that the following changes have happened in legendary events for Tank Smasher. In the Ragnar event, he's no longer part of the beta track physical battle, but he has been added to the Gamma track, no physical battle. In the Vitruvius event, there's no change. Tank Smash has never been one that I've particularly leveled up, and I don't think it's one that I'm going to be starting to level up just now, but it might be of interest for some of you. But let's move back to Azkor, and moving on to how good he is with legendary events. Starting with the Ragnar legendary event, in the Alpha track, he appears in the Resilient, max 3 hits, and melee battles. As he's a Chaos character, he isn't in the Beta track, but he appears in the Gamma track in the melee, no physical, and no Black Legion battles. And this gives him a very respectable 380 points in total for the Ragnar event. Usually my cutoff is around about 400 points for characters which are really good, so he's right on the edge. Moving to the Vitruvius event, in the Alpha track he appears in the no Psychic battle. He doesn't appear in the Beta track again as there's no Chaos, but in the Gamma track he appears in the no Flying, no Death Guard, no Psyker, and max 2 hits battles. And this leaves him with a total of only 290 points, so not quite as useful here, but it's really up to you whether you want to use him or not. If we move on to the best teams overall tab, we can see that he's down in 30th position, which is pretty reasonable for a new character. Most of the new characters have been pretty low, and so I think that this is pretty good. We'll have to wait and see how this changes with the release of the Karn legendary event. He definitely has potential in legendary events. So what do you think of Azkor? Is this collection of demons in a meat sack going to be eviscerating your enemies, or will he just be left to rot with your other characters? You can check him out right now in the latest version of the Google Planner Sheets linked below.